Hey everyone, welcome back to WTF Menopause. And it is March, and we're talking about weight this month and weight gain, all the challenges associated with that when it comes to menopause. And so I'm here with my husband to talk about weight, our weight loss journey. We had kind of a interesting story that started with me, and then I brought you into the mix, and we've had some challenges that actually really kind of play into menopause and my perimenopause issues. So I thought it was relevant for us to have that conversation.
All right, let's do it.
So I started with a massive freak out one day when I saw myself in the reflection of a storefront window. I was hanging out with a friend up in my hometown, and I saw myself and I was like, holy hell, how did I get here? What's going on? And um, that was my day that I made the decision that something had to change. And it's funny because up until that point, I had tried a little bit here and there, but I wasn't something that I was really super invested in. I think because I thought that, well, it's midlife, I'm in my mid 40s, I'm going to start gaining weight. This is kind of the way it is, and this is what I have to deal with, and I have to just accept it. And um when I saw myself, I was like, I'm not accepting this at all. I'm not doing it. So I don't know if you remember, I came home and I said, that's it, I'm done. I'm not doing this. I'm going to start fasting, and I'm going to start eating differently. And that went over like about as well as anything would, but it very much like a lead balloon. You were not happy.
No.
And then part of that was my meal times were at lunch. I was fasting at lunchtime, and you got upset um, because I was not having dinner with the family. You were unhappy about that.
Yeah, well, all right. So first of all, back up a little bit because, yeah, you were in that place, but so was I. And, um, I had tried a lot of different things,
Mhm.
and I had pretty much given up. I was traveling for work, um, you know, not unlimited expense account, but, I could eat pretty much whatever I wanted. Um, on the company's dime, and so I did, and it just kind of started spiraling out of control. And you had started this
Mhm.
as well, but I was kind of in the same place too. Um, so
Yeah. I
just
mean, yeah,
a little bit of background for
you
everybody.
taquitos for breakfast are not a good thing.
I didn't have that.
Somebody would stop at the gas station,
McDonald's.
McDonald's, and all kinds of things. It was bad. We both like food. That's our
Yep,
number one thing. We
for
both are
sure.
massive foodies. We went to Ireland and ate our way through and drank our way through the Guinness, and oh, it
Well,
was so much fun.
that's a little different. That's excusable
Well, that's
a
what
little bit.
that. I think I gained 10 pounds in a week. It was insane. But so I started, and it was touch and go. I mean, you were upset some nights because there were foods that I wasn't going to eat, and you most of the time make our dinners, and you were trying to figure out what I would eat and what I wouldn't eat, and that was getting a little frustrating. But
Well, I ended up making two meals essentially because I make something for
sometimes,
you and
yeah.
then something for everybody else, and that just got to be a royal pain in the butt.
Yeah. Well, and there were some things we could do that was just like not have taco shells with dinner, or something like
Sure,
that. But
sure, there were little things, but
yeah. And then when um, we went to that wedding, and that was really your turning point, I think. And we talked, so we were by ourselves and we were able to kind of hang out a bit. And you were really just frustrated with everything, and you were concerned. about your own health, really. That's what it boiled down to, not so much weight, but health. And, I said, well, try this. It can't hurt. And you did.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was that, but it was also the doctor saying, essentially that he had given up on me, and that the only way to not be diabetic and lose weight was to have weight loss surgery. And I rejected that out of hand, because I know a little bit about it. I know a lot of people who have gone through it, and a lot of people who have not had good outcomes, or have just, reverted in the end. So,
Success rate is pretty low on those things.
Long-term success rate. Short-term, it does work. So, it was really about, we had to make a choice, and I resisted as long as possible. But in the end, it was just easier and ultimately in my best interest to, join you in the way we eat. And so, it was a little bit of a struggle, but I can tell you that I started November 9th of 2018. That was when I started.
For real. You kind of half-assed it for a couple of weeks in October.
Yeah. I mean, when it really came right down to it, and I started tracking what I was eating, that was what was most eye-opening. And that was really kind of, it's like, holy crap, that's way too much.
Yeah.
And all the proportions were way wrong. So, that's when I started using an app to track what I eat. And it was all downhill from there.
Literally. You're 90 pounds out.
Yeah.
So that's pretty awesome. And I'm down 60, which is about where I should be. But so here's the funny thing and this is why I think it's important for the show, is that once I started, and I would say I almost immediately got more energy. And I started seeing results really quickly. And the brain fog lifted. My hangry, which we talked about before, I used to have massive bouts of hangry. That went away. And I think a lot of this had to do with the fact that I was regulating my hormones through my food. And that didn't occur to me until later, after I had really lost, I would say, the most of the weight that I had meant to lose, and then some. And then I went to the conference and found out about the connection between menopause and nutrition, and keto in particular. That's what we do, and how that can really benefit women in menopause. And that's when I lit a fire under my butt, because I was like, holy hell, if we can get people to see the connection between that, then we're going to make so many lives better, because they'll be able to regulate so many of the challenges that they have now outside of weight. I mean, weight is definitely there, but there are other massive benefits to this. You're off your metformin. You've reduced your blood pressure significantly. You've had a ton of success with this. I've gone and I didn't have any of those really major issues, but I was able to start to regulate so many things. Yeah. And it wasn't until then that I realized that all the stuff that was going on before had to do with going into perimenopause, going into having these hormonal imbalances that might have been associated with menopause, but also might have just been associated with the fact that my insulin was just a complete wreck, because I was constantly eating sugar, and that's my drug of choice, is sugar. So I love it. Unfortunately, it doesn't love me back. It doesn't love anybody back. But it's really hard to kill it when that craving, when your hormones are completely out of whack. You can't regulate that. So with that, though, I mean, we both struggled with our weight pretty much our whole lives. I mean, you probably, I think, a little bit more than me.
100% all my life. Yep.
Yeah. Here's some challenges that I see and I hear from women that are now starting to gain that weight around their middle, and just feeling uncomfortable, feeling self-conscious about it. And I'm trying to word this in a way that doesn't sound terrible. But when we start gaining the weight, we start feeling less confident, we start feeling less desirable. We don't, all the things that happen when we gain weight. From your perspective as a spouse or a partner, what are you thinking when, I mean, it's hard to see the weight gain right off the bat. It's like, it's a slow build a lot of times. And this is a free zone. You get to say whatever you want without any retribution.
Well, that's a lie, but okay.
But I mean, what are you thinking in particular? And I know you can't speak for all men or all people, but how does that affect you when we're struggling with our weight? And how are you seeing it? Does it matter to you? What's going on for you?
Well, for me, I mean, I was honestly involved in my own struggles, so I don't know, it didn't make
Backstory, every time I ask him anything about my weight, he completely loses his mind because he just gets so uncomfortable with this. So this is kind of unfair, but at the same time, I think it's a good, important thing.
But see, the thing is, number one, from my perspective, I was way more overweight than you. So who the hell am I to tell you that you're overweight and that, I don't want to have sex with you because you're too fat? That would be, well, a relationship killing, possibly physically hurtful to me. But in all seriousness, though, I was too far in my own head to even worry about it. And I know that you were insecure about it, but to me, it mattered, but I didn't feel that I had any place to say anything because I was in the same boat. I mean, like we keep saying, I realize that this is, we're talking about menopause, but men have similar hormone changes as they age, and, similar things happen. The dad bod happens or the beer belly happens, they call it different things, but it's really the same or similar things. So, who the hell am I to say anything?
Right.
So,
and I fully support that. But I also have heard stories where that has been the exact opposite, where people have said, you're too fat to have sex with. I can't even look at you.
I've heard all kinds of stories about
awful.
that, but then you chose poorly to begin with. I mean,
well,
or there's something else going on over and above just that weight issue.
You think that's what it is?
You're not communicating, or I absolutely.
Well, I think it's extremely hurtful for someone to say, I don't care if you're 1,000 pounds. If you say, everything's going wonderfully, quote unquote, wonderfully and fine, and then you gain 30 pounds, because that's about the average that what a lot of women gain around their belly, some more. And um, and all of a sudden you hear that, or someone tells you that, I think that if that's the only criteria that you're making for for having sex or for doing anything with this person, that's a makes me want to punch people.
Well, but that's what I'm saying.
You
I mean,
know,
that's a communication issue there's a lot more going on there, that is unresolved, that
so do
needs
you,
to be resolved.
yeah, I think that that's a dare.
You got yourself all worked up.
I did. I got myself worked up. Well, I mean, I think it's important to understand the difference between a partner who's maybe insensitive and frustrated because they don't know how to communicate with their female partner that is dealing with this. To say some of those things to me is borderline emotional abuse. And now
Oh, it is. It's not
or
borderline at all.
yeah. And
that crosses the line.
It crosses the line. And I very much feel sensitive to that since I have a history of emotional abuse with a partner, not you, obviously. And that really fires me up, and I get really upset because no one should have to go through that. And at the same, I want to be sensitive because some men just don't know how to freaking communicate. They just don't know how to freaking say what they need to say, and
for sure,
the things that are important, and that's how it comes out. And I don't think the intention is to be abusive. I think it's just freaking insensitivity and ignorance on some part. But I also think that if there's other patterns of, self-esteem crushing, killing type things, that's a bigger issue, a bigger red flag. And that to me signals there's a bigger, broader issue that may not get resolved, because if that person is that way in other areas as well, then there might be bigger issues that need to be addressed. And that's scary. I've been there, and it's hard to process. And this is not the place I intended to go to, but I think it's important.
No, it is important. And, from my perspective, I've seen a lot of different people, I guess, say mean things, trying to be funny, they're trying to put it in a humorous light, and that's just as bad. I think a lot of this comes from just not understanding how to communicate with your partner.
Yeah.
Haha, you're too fat to have sex with. But I think depending on how it's framed or how it's said, it's either, I don't know that would cross the line into emotional abuse. It's a cry for help, I guess, on the other person's part, because they don't know how to talk to you about it.
I don't know. That seems like a really mean, nasty cry for help.
It is. I agree. But I know people who would say something like that.
I know.
And not be abusive. The one person that sticks in my mind I wouldn't call him abusive, but he's certainly insensitive. He doesn't know how to say
anything sincere,
or positive, or it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't mean he's a bad person. It means he doesn't really have the capability to communicate well.
Yeah.
And you probably know exactly what
I
I'm talking
do,
about.
and I'm ready to put my hand through his face. So yeah, I guess to me, there's no excuse. If you're going to joke about it, you have to know nobody, I don't think anyone would think that the recipient of that would feel good about that type of talk.
Yeah.
I think they'd have to know that. And if they don't, then there's something bigger wrong with their perception of the world.
Right.
I think that's my opinion. But I think that the first step that we can all take, especially women, in dealing with this issue, because I know it's huge. It weighs on our minds. It's just so frustrating because you're going along just fine, and then wham, one day you're not the same person, the same body, and you just don't know what happened because you haven't done anything different, and all of a sudden, bam, this is happening. But I think the big first step is to find that compassion for yourself. And I think that goes for anyone who is dealing with weight struggles. Find that compassion and that self-love, because you can lose all the weight you want. If you don't love yourself, if you don't find that compassion for yourself, you're still going to hate your body. You can be exactly at the ideal weight and you're still going to think something's wrong.
Yeah.
It doesn't fix it.
Well, that's why eating disorders exist, right?
Right.
On both sides of the spectrum.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And I think that it's huge to acknowledge that. And you don't have to necessarily accept the weight, but you do have to accept your body. And I don't know how that, well, I do know how. It's just you have to accept everything and then move to make your body healthy. Because it's not, if you're focusing just on the number on the scale, your body could be in the right number, quote unquote, right number, but you could be completely unhealthy. There's been studies of people who lose weight eating shit.
Right. I mean, you can weigh 110 pounds and be horribly healthy, and you can be 350 pounds and be perfectly healthy.
Right.
Just, not that either of those are necessarily good situations, but
right. Yeah, and I
know.
think it's the foundation. Your foundation is finding that compassion, finding that self-love, and then working toward finding something that works for you to get you where you want to be. And so we did keto, and that seemed to work, and that really became like the domino thing, the one thing that kind of put a lot of other things in motion for us to really get to this place where we're even able to have these conversations, to have the talk about the issues that we're having with my body, and realizing what it really is instead of just something that's all up in my head, and understanding it more. I think that makes a huge difference. The nutrition, once you get your nutrition in place, regardless of your weight, you're going to feel better. You're going to think clearer, and you'll be in a better place, I think, to see what needs to be changed, that you want changed in your life, whatever that might be.
Yeah. Yeah. And, for us, at least for me, things worked a lot better when we were doing it together. It's like quitting smoking. If you've got two people smoking in the house and one quits and the other doesn't, it's really hard.
Practically impossible.
Practically impossible. And, the other thing I wanted to say is that, your doctor is part of your team as well.
Absolutely.
And, my doctor and I have, we've been at odds a few times. I actually stopped going to the doctor because he kept telling me that, my weight was the number one problem and I needed to lose weight. And that was the cause of every ailment that I had, which is not true, and don't settle for that. And then, one day Traci went to see him because we see
See
the
the
same
same.
doctor. Um, and he's like, why haven't I seen Aaron for a while? And she's like, well, let me tell you. And
And I literally told him that every time you come in, that all you hear is that you're fat.
yep.
And he was shocked. He says, I don't say those words. I said, it doesn't matter. That's what he hears. And that's as much as saying it.
Yeah.
And he felt really bad, to his credit.
Yeah. And also to his credit, I did go back, and ever since then, he's changed his tune, and, we've been working, we've been monitoring things pretty closely. He has not talked about surgery anymore. Um, every time I go see him now, he's very excited, at the progress that I've made. So I just wanted to make sure to get that out there, that, doctor is important.
But they are.
Don't let them bully you
No.
into doing something that you don't want to do.
Right.
Make sure to do your research.
Yeah.
Surgery may be the answer for some people.
Right.
It may not be the answer either. Just be very cautious, I guess, but work with your doctor closely.
Well, and I strongly believe, for obviously because of what I did, but I really think it's important to be your best advocate. If
Absolutely.
you can't get your doctor to hear you, if
Find
you're
another doctor.
Right, find another doctor. If you are struggling with a doctor who wants to push you to do something that you don't feel comfortable with, find another doctor, or have that conversation with them and say, look, this is, because sometimes they just don't know.
Yep.
They're human, and they're doing what they think is best in their opinion. And they do have the training, and that's great. But it's your body. You get to advocate and do what you want, even if it may not be in their opinion the best choice. But that same doctor and I have gone round and round about what I do and how I approach my health, and he finally realized what was going on and realized it was not a bad thing.
Right. I mean, he actually did the research,
Yep.
out, and he did change his tune quite a bit.
Yep.
And
you can influence your doctor as well.
For sure. And again, one size does not fit all, but the end goal is everybody wants to be healthy, and your doctor wants you to be healthy. So, work with them, and don't be afraid to switch doctors until you find one that works with you instead of against you.
Right. And there are different types of doctors. There's functional medicine, and there's traditional MDs, and there's all kinds of something in between. And, a lot of the traditional medicine doctors don't get a lot of training in nutrition. They don't get a lot of training in understanding.
Almost none.
Yeah, almost none. Hell, I just found out that OBs, gynecologists, don't get a ton of training in menopause. And I found that out from an OB. So that's nuts to me. If you're somebody who specializes in women's health, wouldn't you have more in-depth training in menopause? That seems like a logical thing. And a lot of women are finding that their gynecologists don't understand what's going on. And a lot of times they're being told they have to suffer. There's nothing they can do, or they take, they need to take the hormones, which that's a personal choice. And it's something that you have to discuss with your doctor. And if you don't want to, then certainly, but there's a lot of reasons in between, that's a whole huge can of worms. But that's the two options, or anxiety, or, go on some antidepressants. Those are their options a lot of times from the doctors, because they don't understand. Yep. They don't know, they haven't done their extra research. So while I am all for experts, and I think that people who work in science know a lot of stuff, they're not going to be infallible, and they may not have the training. And so sometimes you have to be your own best. Well, you always have to be your own best advocate. And sometimes you have to do your own research. There's a lot of stuff out there that you can find from reputable sources that you can, help your doctor learn as well, because they don't always know. So that's a very good point, and I'm glad you made it. Um, so yeah, I think that working together in this, even if one person isn't necessarily needing to lose weight, but being encouraging instead of discouraging, is going to go a lot further than
For sure.
anything else. And one of the problems that you and I struggle with when it comes to pretty much anything, we like to compete. And sometimes it gets a little bit tough well, there's no way we could compete pound for pound. That wouldn't work. I would turn into a fetus or something.
Well, physiology is different between men and women too.
Right.
It doesn't work the same way.
So we've had some challenges with that. We kind of got into a little bit of a competition of who was losing the most during the week. And finally I was like, this is stupid. I'm never going to be able to keep up. So it's better to just learn to become a team. And, it helps to push sometimes, when the other person may not want to do it, or, kind of give them a little bit of a nudge. But I also think we've learned that sometimes when you're expressing your frustration, coaching you isn't the best option, because that doesn't usually end well. Getting a lot of nods. So he knows better than to say much more. But yeah, so, I know for a lot of us, we're dealing with some significant weight issues. There are options and there is hope. So don't give up. We all have an opportunity to make changes, even if it's more of an internal change in changing our nutrition so that at least we're healthy on the inside. That's really the first key. And once you get that foundation, then it's a lot easier for your body to drop the weight, because your body is holding on for a reason, usually because it's afraid of something. There's a whole lot of physiology going on, where feast or famine, and hormones and insulin and all even estrogen and it's everywhere. It's all the things. So don't give up. If you have any questions, just reach out and I'd be happy to answer them. In the meantime, we will see you next week, and we'll see you next month.
All right.